Boy, I got another video. I need juice. There's juice or water right there.
It's water.
That's gonna make my mouth dry. Oh, God bless X. Yeah. I got another video right now. We going to the West Coast. But we're going to tap in with the Asian brothers. You know what I'm saying? We're going to check out some of the Asian gangsters. Because I'm always covering pretty much Black, Latino shit. Let's go see other cultures. We went to London. We went to another country. Now let's do another group of people. You know what I'm saying? Just like everybody out there thugging. I don't know. I'm lit. I don't give a fuck. Yo, play the video, nigga. Play the video, bro.
We head back to LA. The past few episodes were just topics that I felt like making for my own enjoyment, but now we're back to the bangers. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. You can also follow the Instagram page as well. So let's get into it. Long Beach, California.
Support that man.
The last time I covered it, everyone was on my head about a few comments. First, I said that every house in Long Beach has a pool in the backyard. No, every house in Long Beach does not actually have a pool in the backyard. But the point was that Long Beach is a nice city that was built as a relaxing suburb. I mean, it's literally called Long Beach. And secondly, I said that Long Beach is not that dangerous. And this made everyone go completely insane. I would pull up the numbers, but people will still probably say that they're incorrect. If I say that a city is nice and safe, everyone says that I'm disrespecting their city. But then if I say their city is a dump like San Bernardino, everyone says I'm disrespectful as well. So let me just classify Long Beach as a city that is somewhere in between the disgustingness of San Bernardino and the beauty of Beverly Hills. Anyways, in the last video, we discussed the Rolling 20s and the Longos as the most important and feared in Long Beach. But after doing some research and reading comments, I ran across a much more interesting dynamic. A topic that's brushed under the rug but does more numbers than Will Chamberlain and Too Short combined. But before we get into it, let me run the intro. Between 1967 and 1975, Cambodia underwent one of the worst battles in human history. Hundreds of thousands of casualties.
Working from home has its upsides and downsides.
And unbelievable living conditions caused Cambodia to be completely unlivable. Imagine for 8 years straight, you can't do anything but fight for your life and for your family's safety. You can't meet up with your friends and go to the mall or take a mini vacation to Palm Springs. And the worst part is that you don't have time to think about good memories or have time to think about the future. All that matters to you is making it to the next day. And that was life in Cambodia for 8 straight years. There were children who actually knew nothing but chaos and survival for the first 8 years of their life. Then came 1975, when it all ended. The land was destroyed, so hundreds of thousands of Cambodians moved to America over the next 10 years. And they were directed to 4 different cities. First was Long Beach, then Stockton, then Oakland, and finally Lowell, Massachusetts. But for now, we focus on Long Beach because that's where the biggest population moved to. In 1975, the east side of Long Beach had a major influx of Cambodian families. They came over with very little money and usually lived 2 to 3 families in one home. And some even say that 20 plus people were living inside a single house. So after a few years of working, they primarily opened donut shops, cafes, beauty salons, and traditional restaurants. And with these established businesses, the families wanted to provide structure for their kids to become doctors, lawyers, and engineers. And many kids did actually graduate college and succeed in life. However, many of them fell victim to the environment of the east side of Long Beach. The east side of Long Beach is split into different sections. You have the Rolling 20s, Longo 13, Sons of Samoa, and finally the Baby Insanes. And all of these groups are territorial and willing to show their dominance by any means. connections. So once these families arrived, they had to maneuver the neighborhood and going to school through all of these affiliations. And these groups were known to be awful to them, trying to punk them at every chance. And in response to this, there's always two routes. You either compromised your pride and focused on education, which is extremely difficult for a young man to do. Because in order to do this, you pretty much had to say, fine, you can say whatever you want to me, but in 10 years, I'll be a doctor making $300K.
When it comes to California hoods, being they don't have like a mass transit like we do, their transit is more like how Jersey transit is. But like in New York City, you can go to school far from your crib, and you by default you're going past several territories, several hood territories, and then maybe your school might have a gang of that region right there, right, or whatever. But you don't. Maybe in the 90s, like you hear stories from dudes like in the 90s, like certain gangs will hang out at certain train stops. So you know certain train stops, like Low Lives was known for being at the Broadway Junction stop. Like that was their stop. All the Low Lives would be there, scoping, ready to take somebody's shit. Like, and you know, a lot of people used to get their jackets, book bags, sneakers, jewelry, everything taken on the train. But in more recent times, it just be weird, bizarre shit that happens on the train. And you just like, what the fuck is going on, bro? Like, it just be weird shit now. But 9 times out of 10, like, you could take a bus and you gonna be good. You could go through a hood on the bus. It's not like niggas gonna see you on the bus and just run on the bus and like the chances is slim. You know what I'm saying? Niggas have shot up buses before on some dickhead shit. Several times, but it's just not really frequent. It has been done, but it's not frequently done. So for the most part, niggas gotta catch you slipping out here. And there you gotta, like, if you gotta go to school, you gotta go to a certain store or something, you gotta go through that neighborhood, whether you on the bus, you on the train that's outside, you on the, cause that train is ground level. The trains in New York that's outside, it's above ground level. So if niggas is down there, they really can't see who's up there. Like, but they shit is more on the street. So, you know what I'm saying? They could see who's in there. You know what I mean? Fucking, what I was about to say, you know what I'm saying? You gotta go through the physical neighborhood. Like I always heard, like, you gotta be careful stopping at the red light, shit like that, because somebody's looking. Somebody just might be looking. So I just find that interesting, like geographically.
In fact, that was probably the best route to take. However, the other route was very understandable as well, but it had its consequences. Many of the teenagers were fed up and they decided that they had to assert their own dominance in Long Beach. And that's when they created TRG, also known as the Tiny Rascals. At first, they weren't taken very seriously because of their small stature and being...
Damn. Come on, they trying to get me copywritten, bruh. With the double ad? That's crazy. The double ad.
Due to the language. But little did these other groups know, these guys grew up...
Homie look like G Herbo right here in the black hoodie. Like my son G Herbo in the cut.
But little did these other groups know, these guys grew up in way worse environments than Stockton, San Bernardino, and Compton combined. These guys were absolutely fearless. So instantly, TRG and Longo 13 were bitter rivals. And the 1980s were reckless between the two. However, it only involved hands and maybe a Swiss army every once in a while. But everything changed on Halloween 1989. A group of Eastside Longos are parked on Cherry Avenue in Long Beach hanging out outside their car. That's when a car full of TRG pull right beside them with their gray rags out of the window. A 16-year-old Longo named Oswaldo advances towards the car. Bang! This moment changed Long Beach forever because it elevated a rivalry to new heights. Before this, it was really all showmanship and bare knuckles. But now, anything could happen at any time. During the next 2 years, over 10 people lost their life just between TRG and the Eastside Longos. And according to the internet, TRG were the ones causing the damage, but actually it was not that simple. That's because the Longos were also dealing with their own internal rivalry at the same time. The Eastside and Westside Longos had a rivalry dating back a few decades, and TRG was making it impossible for them to handle both at the same time. So in 1992, La M ordered the East and West rivalry to end and for them to come together against TRG. So in response, TRG needed reinforcement as well, which came from two groups. First, let me introduce you to the Asian Boys, also known as ABZ. I previously covered them in a Stockton video, but that was like the G League version. ABZ in Long Beach is huge and controls a large portion of the east side. Well, after ABZ joined their side, so did another unexpected group of guys. That would be the Insane Crips, also known as IGC. And because of this, the 1990s were absolute chaos between the Longos and the rest of Long Beach. The Longos outnumbered everyone severely, but they were also at a huge disadvantage. ABZ and TRG were still connected to the motherland. They were able to receive shipments of all kinds of things. I'm talking about items that you would only see in GTA 5, but importing all of this was very expensive, so they had to come up with thousands of dollars quick. So starting in 1994, TRG became notorious for running in houses from Bakersfield all the way to San Bernardino. Wait, am I reading that correctly? What can you possibly take in San Bernardino? I heard they don't even have running water out there. Anyways, that strategy allowed them to have plenty of cash to purchase anything they wanted to use against the Longos. Well, after years of back and forth with the Longos, TRG began having its own internal issues with ABZ. There were always tensions between the two, but it officially fell apart around the year 2000. And that led ABZ to having their own separate identity, which came in the form of Blue Rags. ABZ was always really close with the Insane, so it was only right that they joined the Crip family. Well, this decision to separate from TRG and join the Crips caused a lot of fear within the community. It ultimately led to a lot of families moving out of Long Beach. Most either went to Santa Ana, which is a quiet city in Orange County, or they went to Fresno, which is located a few hours north of LA. And finally, some switched coasts and moved all the way to Lowell, Massachusetts, where they stayed with long-lost family members. And in all of these cities, ABZ and TRG began forming their new identities as well. But for now, let's focus on the ABZ in Long Beach. They now cover 13 by 22 blocks in the east side of Long Beach and are possibly the most feared in the city. And the rivalry with TRG got really serious in 2001. And shout out to Sergio Kwan. If you haven't seen his channel, he goes in depth in these stories as well. It's 2001 and TRG and ABC are not seeing eye to eye to the point where ABZ wants to send a message. And they have a perfect person in mind. That would be Ruel Hulbert, who's also known as Low Key. He is one of the few non-Cambodian TRGs, and because of that, he sticks out like a sore thumb. Well, on a random day around February 2001, Low-Key is at the Jackrabbit liquor store in Long Beach. That's when a group of ABZ pull up. Bang. Thankfully, Low-Key is okay, but this moment would change his life forever. You'll see what I mean. But TRG's initial response to the incident did not please him. They wanted to have a truce with ABZ before things get worse. And once Low-Key found out, he was not pleased at all. He wanted nothing to do with peace at all and went out and handled it himself. And it all occurred over a 2-week span. December 19th, 2003. Low-Key drives out to ABZ territory where he runs into a man named Daniel Chanta. Daniel himself is not ABZ, however he does associate with them. Well, Daniel has no clue who Low-Key is, so they agree to hang out later in the afternoon. So 5 hours pass and Low-Key comes back to meet up with Daniel. Low-Key walks up to him and says, "Hey, do you remember me?" Bam! 11 days later, New Year's Eve 2003. Most people are having fun on New Year's Eve, maybe having a drink or two, but not Low-Key. He decides to drive around ABZ territory looking for people outside. My son became a demon. And on East 14th Street, he spots a top ABZ man named Wood T. Buntong. Bang.
Oh, my son became a demon.
He is not done just yet. The next day, on January 1st, 2004, he wants some more. So he drives around East 15th Street in Long Beach looking for more ABZ. He spots a corn fan right there in a...
Damn, my son was on Demon Tom. God damn.
A Honda Civic. Bang. Well, 4 days later, low-key went down for everything, and this is where things get really interesting. In court, he cried the entire time and was a complete emotional disaster. And as bad as he was, it's really hard to not feel sorry for him. During the case, they went all the way back to his mother's childhood and how he was even conceived in the first place. They discussed how the same cycle repeated itself in his childhood. Now, I can't say everything that I want to share, but if you look up his name, you will be able to find the articles. Ultimately, we are all victims of our own emotions, and low-key was no different. He ended up getting life, but regardless, the court sessions actually ended up bringing his family together. It was the first time that they had ever voiced the things they had been through. Well, after this, Long Beach kept getting worse and worse. However, a new rapper began bringing light to the area. That would be Stupid Young, but before he started rapping, he earned his stripes to become an ABZ. Rumors say that his dad was one of the original members and strongly tried to dissuade his son from joining. But he was in love with the lifestyle regardless. But at age 15, he went down for possession of a band machine, and he was sent to Camp Challenger, LA County's juvenile hall. And the judge gave him a deal. If he were to enroll in a music program called Flow, his sentence was reduced by 2 months. So that's where he began rapping. And in the program was another teenager named Daryl Caldwell, more famously known as Draco the Ruler. Rest in peace to the legend, we know the truth. Well, after years of rapping, Stupid Young blew up with hit songs like Mando, Trust Nobody, and plenty more. And many people were curious because, you know, for obvious reasons. Some thought it was parody and others thought he was just a fraud. But after a legendary No Jumper vlog, everyone was introduced to his life in ABZ. And it showed us where everything goes down, the 1300 block of Wesley Drive. This is a corner that connects ABZ's back alley to an open street, putting them at a huge disadvantage. And that takes us to January 25th, 2017. Stupid Young's close friend David Sevilla, also known as Dirt, sets up a meeting with a man from Compton. The Compton man wants to purchase some mud from him, so Dirt tells him to meet him in the back alley off the 1300 block of Wesley Drive. Well, the man shows up, but he actually isn't there to purchase anything. He wants a 5-finger discount. Well, Dirt has big pride and he is not going for it, so an argument breaks out. Bang! This was a random incident, but it just goes to show that living that life in LA is always a risk. However, the next incident is not so random, and that takes us to March 12th, 2018. ABZ are hanging out in their famous alley, and that's when 2 TRG men pull up. An argument follows and the TRG men take it to another level. Bang! This incident was devastating for ABZ, and to make things worse, TRG was not done yet. And that takes us to Halloween 2019. ABZ decides to throw a Halloween party in their backyard on the east side. And the man officially Timmy Noy to the party and tells him to invite some friends. So Timmy invites a friend named Jeremy Penn. Unfortunately, this guy happens to be a top certified TRG. And as you know, that is absolutely off limits. But we can give Timmy the benefit of the doubt that he has no idea that he's easy. Well, after Timmy invites him, Jeremy gets really angry. He claims that he does not like whoever he rolls with. Well, Timmy thinks nothing of it and drops off Jeremy at home at 3 p.m. Then comes 10 p.m. Timmy is at the party in the backyard with dozens of people. Out of nowhere, Timmy gets a call from Jeremy telling him to leave the party right now. Timmy responds, "Why?" And then Jeremy just hangs up. Instantly, Timmy gets paranoid and tells Daniel that he's scared. And because of this, everyone goes inside the home. Well, after about 20 minutes, Daniel's dad tells everyone that it's okay to go back outside. However, little do they know, Jeremy is on his way with 7 friends behind him in 3 different cars. 10:20 p.m. The 3 cars full of TRG pull up to the back alley. Bam!
Yikes.
This incident was solved a
It
few
just was
days
just
later and
smoking
8
random
people went
dudes.
down. And this is now known as the worst
like-
thing that TRG has.
I'm like, California, it's not even, like, it seems like sometimes just your race and your location will automatically put you are with these people. Automatically. That's your race, This is where you from? Oh yeah, you with them. They don't even care. They took out a bunch of random dudes. I'm assuming because they were most likely Cambodian. Having no clue. Those was just random dudes. Niggas just pulled up to the party. New York, it's more so your attitude and what you wearing. Because, you know, you ain't trying to go to jail for nothing. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Ever facilitated. Also, let me be clear, this is not everything that's taken place. Obviously, way more has happened. This is just what has been documented. So don't say that I'm painting
van. They got their
picture.
GTA
I'm
van.
not gonna include
What the
things
fuck?
that aren't officially documented. TRG
They got
has
4
taken
stars,
a lot
bro.
of losses as well, except I can't just pin it on ABZ. But what is documented is what ABZ
Nice.
has been doing to the Longos, which I can include in
Oh,
a separate
word,
episode.
Chinatown?
In fact, 13
Well, let's
members.
see what the Chinatown joint talking about.
Welcome back to another episode of Swamp Stories. For this episode, we cover a story that has slipped through the cracks of history. But before we get into it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you're new. You can also follow the Instagram page as well. So let's get into it. In order for this video to make sense, let's head way back into history, around the year 1850. Because that's when Chinese immigrants first began moving to America. During this time, China was mostly undeveloped and agricultural, and because of this, opportunities to make money were very limited, even for the most skilled people in society. Well, during the early 1850s, word got around that there was a major gold rush happening across the Pacific Ocean. So thousands of families pooled their resources together and decided to take the risk of a lifetime. They took ships and traveled a long, difficult journey across the Pacific Ocean. But sadly, once they arrived, almost all of the gold was already gone. So then these families were faced with a tough decision. They had just spent their last resources to come strike it rich in America, but ultimately that fell short. So, do they stay in an unfamiliar land after not finding what they came here for, or do they return back to the homeland? Well, ultimately, almost all 25,000 decided to stay in California and do whatever jobs they could to survive and assimilate. Many of the men became fishermen and others began working construction, but finding a job was not as easy as it sounds. However, in 1863, that would change as the US announced the construction of the first transcontinental railroad. The plan was to connect San Francisco all the way to Council Bluffs, Iowa, but the government had a major problem. They could barely find anyone to work these jobs. That's because workers had to leave their families for months on end. And on top of this, they would have to go to the middle of nowhere to build tracks all day long. So in order to fill the shortage, the US would somehow get the word out to China. And boom, 300,000 Chinese immigrants came to California to start work. And by 1880, they made up over 10% of the state's population. They began to build their own neighborhoods in California's biggest cities. San Diego, Los Angeles, Sacramento, San Jose, and San Francisco all had large Chinatowns by 1880. But then came 1882, when the US government introduced one of the strangest legislations in American history. That would be the Exclusion Act. Here's what it did. Only Chinese men could now come to America, and they had to leave their wives and children back home. Now, why they enacted this, I don't know. You guys can come up with your own conclusions. I'll just talk about the results.
So they won't
after
raise
this
their
passed,
families
a
here.
huge problem followed. In 1890, the Bay Area had 89,000 Chinese men. And do you want to guess how many women? Less than 5,000. And because
Yikes.
of the shortage, the men began looking for other options. And I know where you guys think I'm going with this, but no,
Right.
let me explain. In Louisiana, 57% of Chinese men got married to African American women. And in California, 43% married European women. Well, essentially, the act halted the growth of the Chinese American community. And it stayed that
see,
way
that's
until
what I thought.
1943, when the legislation was finally thrown in the trash. And as soon as this happened, the Chinese population began to grow very quickly. And the majority of them moved to Chinatowns all over California. And that takes us to San Francisco Chinatown, one of the oldest and quietest neighborhoods in the city. But things would begin to change in 1960, and this had nothing to do with Chinatown itself. Let me explain. In 1960, a group of teenagers from Hong Kong moved to San Francisco. They came to escape the chaotic streets of their hometown and expected things to be easy in San Francisco. But they were met with an unexpected surprise. The teenagers began attending Galileo High School, which at the time was one of the roughest schools in the city. It's also famous for O.J. Simpson, but that's besides the point. Anyways, while at Galileo, they began running into trouble with students from the Fillmore and Potrero Hill projects. They recall being made fun of and shoved into lockers on a daily basis. And at first, they decided to play along, hoping that it would smooth out. But after a while, they decided that enough was enough, and they began calling themselves Watching, also known as Dub C. Once they band together and made a statement, no one at school would ever mess with them again. And remember, these guys grew up in a chaotic environment back home, so this did not faze them one bit. But not only did they associate with each other at school, but in the neighborhood as well. And that takes us to the Ping Yuen Projects, Chinatown's 12-story public housing complex. And this is where the Hong Kong teens were living. And what they didn't know is that it came with certain rules. Let me explain. Chinatown was very well organized, especially when it came to the streets. Everything was controlled by the Tongs, and all this means is a gathering place for an association. Chinatown had multiple Tongs, such as Sing Sui and Hop Sing, and this is who ran the neighborhood.
Okay, so this is
Everything
now
had to pass
Chinatown,
by
New York
them.
City.
So once the Tongs got word about a new group called Watching forming in Chinatown, they were not happy. But instead of being confrontational, they decided to handle it another way. They would call for a meeting with Watching and offer to protect them in exchange for monthly payments. And at first, Watching completely laughed at the idea. They thought that it was a ridiculous idea and they were better off protecting themselves. Well, they didn't know much about the rules of Chinatown and how everything operates. Elders are always respected first, and no one does anything without the approval of higher-ranking members of the community. And that's how money is handled as well. Much of the money came from under-the-table imports of all kinds of things. And those at the top collected the most money, and the younger guys received whatever was left over. So boom, here's the dilemma. Watching can either join together with the Tongs and get in where they fit in, or they can decline and fend for themselves in Chinatown. And this tough decision would actually split up Watching. The majority of members decided that accepting the Tongs' offer was the safest route. That would be except for two brothers. Let me introduce you to Joe Fong and Glenn Fong. And these two were the most fearless people in Chinatown. They would decide to break away from Watching after their decision to join the Tongs. And that's when they would create their own group called the Joe Boys. And their motto was to do everything their own way and abide by no rules. And on top of this, their plan was to recruit as many people as possible. Joe Fong became the Chinese Nick Saban. He went to Oakland, San Leandro, and Hayward to recruit. So the Joe Boys began roaming around Chinatown with their chests out doing whatever they want. And this is when things got serious. So Watching and the Tongs decided to send a message. March 1st, 1970, 11 in the morning. It's a regular day in Chinatown, and Glenn Fong steps outside of his apartment.
Today is Indigenous Peoples Day.
Tomorrow's is Indigenous Peoples Day.
Although they were trying to humble Joe Fong with this message, they actually made a crazy man even crazier. Joe Fong now has a grudge for the
Don't
rest
sleep
of his
on
life,
nobody,
so he
bro.
would
You
kick
can't
off
sleep
the
on
worst
people,
year in
son.
Chinatown history. In fact, in
There's no
1970,
face
San Francisco had a
to
homicide rate of
violence, even
28.5
though
per
people try to
100,000,
create
which
one.
was actually top 5 in the country. And most of this was related to the Joe Boys versus the rest of Chinatown. However, the Tongs would keep sending messages, and they would do it in a traditional manner. 2 men and 1 rope. That's all. No BAMs, just a rope. On November 5th, 1970, they would find a Joe Boy named George Yun in the Presidio. Then, 2 weeks later on November 19th, they would find another Joe Boy named Alan Hom. And the craziest thing about it is that for both of them, they used the same rope. And this trend would continue to the point where Chinatown became the most dangerous place to go. And because of this, one of the Joe Boys would decide to do something very brave. The man's name is Raymond Leung, and he pulled Joe Fong to the side to tell him to calm down before things get much worse. He was scared for his own sake and for the rivals as well. All of this was destructive and a big waste of time, but this brave suggestion would not work out well for him. The next day, he was discovered in Chinatown. And as soon as you think that things can't possibly get worse, everything would peak in 1977. And that takes us to July 4th, 1977. This is the most profitable time of the year in Chinatown because fireworks are a huge seasonal business. Now remember that the Pingyuan projects are controlled by Hua Qing and Sing Sui, but for some reason, a Joe boy named Felix Huey, also known as Tiger, was selling fireworks in front of Pingyuan, and Hua Qing was not happy about this. Later that night, they would approach him, and bang! This incident here would set off one of the most famous events in California history. So let me break it down. Joe Fong would hire a man named Carlos John to spy on Hua Qing for months on end. He would follow them around for months until he got the information he needed. One day while he was spying on them in a cafe, he overheard them discussing a gathering on Labor Day at the Golden Dragon restaurant. And once they got this information, the Joe Boys would begin planning one of the craziest and worst ideas known to mankind. That takes us to September 4th, 1977. The Joe Boys meet up in nearby Daly City and decide to drive together to the Golden Dragon restaurant. It's 5 of them in a car together, all bammed up and angry as can be. So they get out of the car and walk in the restaurant. Bang!
Ryu, this is crazy.
Just be killing random people, bro. That shit is retarded, son. I mean, the R word is bad. That stuff is dumb, man.
This made national headlines all over the country. And the saddest part is that everyone who didn't make it had nothing to do with Hua Qing. This incident was so big that it caused Chinatown to shut down for a long time. Tourists were now scared to visit and locals were scared to go outside. So the entire community came together and decided that something needed to change. So SFPD would start something called the Task Unit, dedicated to stopping Hua Qing and the Joe Boys. But it would take a few months before they figured out what really happened. March 24th, 1978. 5 people would go down for it, all of which were 17-year-old students at Galileo High School. Curtis Tam got 23 years but ended up getting out in 1991 at the young age of 30 years old. Melvin Yu got life but was released in 2015. Peter Ng got life but was released in 2018. And Tom Yu got life as well but was released in 2014. So that means that everyone involved is currently out and about. But thankfully, after this, everything would calm down. By 1983, Chinatown was back to being one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. The Hua Qing versus Joe Boys rivalry benefited no one, and we can honestly say that they learned from it and moved on.
That's so genius, bro. That's so genius. That's admirable.
Who was actually
That's
at the Golden
admirable
Dragon
right there.
on September
That's admirable right there. That was admirable how the community banded together to say, all right, enough is enough. And they work with the police to just rid the fucking trash. Like, imagine, bro. Really imagine. Imagine if that was to successfully happen. For us, we have to literally move away and rebuild and hope shit does not go left again. Because motherfuckers just would rather just sit in the shit, bro. These people banded together and said that is enough. You gotta respect that. You gotta respect that.
Let me introduce you to Raymond Chow, also
This
known as
shit
Shrimp
done?
Boy. And this guy was possibly just as wild as Joe Fong, except that he moved completely differently. Raymond Chow was high ranked in the Hop Sing Tong. And another difference between him and Joe Fong is that he's a team player, and that would be determined in 1989. That's when a powerful man named Peter Chong contacted him. Chong was the head of Wo Hop To Triad, possibly the biggest Hong Kong-based organization of all time. And at the time, Wo Hop To wanted to expand to the Bay Area, and they had heard good things about Shrimp Boy, so he was chosen to become their West Coast leader. He gladly accepted the powerful role and began expanding quickly. He was making huge money, like unreal amounts that you would never imagine. And on top of this, he was extremely charismatic. Despite having served 2 sentences from 1980 to 1985 and again from 1986 to 1989, he somehow was not regarded as such. In fact, he was often seen hanging out with Gavin Newsom, Nancy Pelosi, and other politicians. And mind you, this is after serving time for all kinds of crazy things. And during all this, he was getting richer and richer in the streets. Despite the absurd amount of money he was making and shots he was calling, he remained under the radar for 25 years. And this may have been due to Chinatown's quiet state after the 1970s. They were no longer the focus of investigation, and Shrimp Boy took full advantage of that. He was seen as the poster child for reformed felons. He gave speeches to the youth, attended government board meetings, and was even featured in commercials. But everything would come falling down in 2014. And that introduces us to a new character, a man by the name of Leland Yee. He was a California state senator, known mostly for his harsh stances against video games. Yes, he wanted to ban games like GTA and Call of Duty because he thought they made children crazy.
Senator Leland Yee told the SF Chronicle, gamers have just got...
I hate that because I'm like, look at all the stuff from the 1970s. They had Pac-Man, and look at the shit they was doing. Like what the hell was Jeffrey Dahmer playing? Tetris, made him wall out. Like, I guess the video games are different.
Quiet down. Gamers have no credibility in this argument.
He was so serious about safety that he introduced a bill that made it illegal to put a for sale sign on your car while it's parked. Anyways, the ambitious senator was actually ambitious in other ways. On March 14th, 2014, big news would come out of Chinatown. Leland Yee was arrested for racketeering, bribery, and all kinds of other charges. The FBI had been wiretapping him for a few months and eventually put his morals to the test. They had undercover agents pretend to be traffickers in the Middle East, and they would contact him and offer him $42,000. Leland Yee would agree on the deal, and that's all they needed. So much for caring about safety. None of that mattered anymore once the money was put in his pockets. So the FBI decided to raid his office and go through all his records. And that's where they found some important information. Leland Yee was making deals and working alongside Raymond Chow. So on March 26, Raymond Chow was arrested on 162 counts of fraud and racketeering. So after 30 years of being under the radar, the dark side of Chinatown had finally come to the light. Raymond Chow was now doing life. Leland Yee served 5 years and was released in July of 2020. Today, these organizations are more low-key than ever, but trust me, they are around and they are making money. But on a positive note, Chinatown...
Hey, everybody else shit is quiet. Our shit is so loud, bro. They have not learned to be quiet yet. I feel like you gotta show it off. Look what you could do when you quiet. You could become a politician on some real life. Bro, this nigga is real life Ghost from Power. Like, went from a street dude to a politician, bro, before you got caught. Yo, with that, it's your boy.